right. Good morning. So good to see everyone here in Theater 6, but wherever you're joining us from, via live stream or across the hall in Theater 2, we are so glad that you have decided to spend some of your time here with us today. And if we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Garry, and I'm one of the pastors here. We're in week 2 of a series called Deconstruction. If you missed last week's message, it kind of sets up the whole feel for this thing. So I'd encourage, if you haven't watched it, to go watch it. You can do that on our app. If you haven't downloaded our app, I would encourage you to do that. We're going to be using it a lot more moving forward. Or you can check out our new website. It's all refreshed, and I would encourage you to do that. But as we heard last week, deconstruction, it's like, even though it's not a new word, it's got new meaning. And it became really popular in the 60s by a French philosopher named Jacques Derrida. See, I can speak French. Today, though, it's a culture-wide phenomenon with thousands of books and podcasts and social media accounts dedicated to talking about it. Now, at its most basic definition, deconstruction is, okay, you're going to want to write this down because it's really deep, okay? Here it is. The dismantling of anything that's been constructed. Yeah, that's deep, eh? But in the context of Christianity, in the context of this series, here's how we're defining it. It's the process of dismantling long-held beliefs that we have about God. And those beliefs that we have, that picture that we have in our mind of what God is like and how He works, we've often received that from our parents, teachers, pastors, from books, from movies, podcasts, and we just gather all those things and we start to put together a picture of what God is like. But then what happens is we get out into the world and we start to get more independent in our thinking and everything else, and all of a sudden as we start experiencing life, those things that we held to, those truths that we held to, all of a sudden don't seem to make sense. And so we begin to question and revisit and rethink all those things, and that is the process of deconstruction. You know, for instance, maybe one of the things you hold to, and it is true that God is love, but you're trying to figure out, okay, well, if God is love, why is there so much hate and violence and evil in the world? I just can't reconcile those two things. Or maybe you were brought up thinking, God is good. He's got your best interest in mind, but you've got this thing happening, this terrible thing happening in your life, or to someone in your family or a friend or somebody, and you're thinking, well, how does that all work? And so you begin questioning those things. Whether you're from a Christian background or some other faith background, or maybe you have no faith background at all, we all have some kind of idea how faith in God and the world works. If I were to sit you down, go to the food court after the service today and ask you, share with me how you think the world works, how God works, how karma works, whatever it is that you're hanging on to, and you would have some kind of answer. And your answer would more than likely start something like this. Well, I believe, right? Or, well, I've always thought that, if this happens, then that'll happen. Or, I think that. And you know what that is, right? That's faith. Because you can't prove 100% whether what you think about or how you think the world works, you just can't 100% define that. And so you have an element of faith. You're wanting to believe that what you believe to be true is actually true. You see, in your way of thinking and my way of thinking, we're always making certain assumptions about things. For instance, we assume that there are some cause and effect relationships that govern life on this planet, kind of like the guy in that opening clip, right? His cable goes out, which is the cause, and then the effect is he books the trip, because he gets stressed out, and then that causes him to get stung, and then on and on it goes, and the next thing you know is he's called Fatty Face, the fisherman. But think for a moment about the way you eat. the way you exercise, the way you run your business, the way you handle your money. There are some assumptions that you have made about how the world works and about the consequences you believe will result because of the things you do. So, in a way, you have an element of faith in your life because you believe that to be true. But have you really thought through how faith works? Where faith really comes from? And why effects don't always follow the cause you think they should? You know what asking questions like that is? That is the process of deconstruction. And like we talked about last week, the process of deconstruction isn't to result in destruction of what you believe to be true about God or not. Often that's what happens because we don't know the reason why we're deconstructing. We're just deconstructing because, well, it sounds cool. I'm going to deconstruct. Right? The process of deconstruction can be a very good thing because it can rid us of the things that are kind of holding us back from stepping into something great. It can be part of a spiritual renewal, a deepening, a strengthening of our faith, our belief and our understanding of God and how He works and how it all intersects with life. And so today we're going to do a little bit of deconstruction and a little reconstructing. Okay? Here we go. Regardless of what you may or may not believe about God, there is a form of faith that you and I have all participated in. And it's called circumstantial faith. Circumstantial faith is our tendency to look for God in the circumstances of our life. It's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? I'll say that right off the top. But unfortunately for many of us, that is the foundation of our faith. So when we feel like God's doing a lot of cool things in our life, you know, like maybe you're going to school and you kind of slacked off, you didn't really study for the test, and as you're walking to school, you're like, oh God, I got to pass this test, please help me pass the test, and you do, and you're like, yay God, you rock. That's a personal story, by the way. Yeah, so, but if things aren't going well, maybe you didn't pass the test, you're going, well, where were you, God? Like, what was that about? Or if things go really, really wrong or sideways, we often think, is there a God? And so our faith kind of ebbs and flows based on our ability to see God in the circumstances of life. And for many of us, many of you here today or watching online, your first faith moment, your first God moment was because you seemingly sensed that God did something in a circumstance in your life. And it was the catalyst, the beginning of your relationship with God. Here's how this kind of worked. Maybe, you've got some big decision to make. And you're just back and forth. You just can't settle on any direction. And so you go, God, I need some help here. Like, I got to make a decision. I know that, but I just don't know which one to make. And then all of a sudden your phone rings. And it's a long-lost friend that you haven't heard from for years. And they say, you pick up the phone and they say, hey, it's been a long time, but I was just thinking about you and just wondering, how you're doing. And you think, whoa. Or maybe you survived an accident of some sort. And the paramedics and the doctors were using words like miracle, incredible, unbelievable, because you survived it. Or maybe for you, as you're sitting on a log on a beach one day watching the sunset, you suddenly saw nature in a completely different way. Like it had to have been crafted and carefully planned and created. It's like you can see the fingerprints of God all over it. Whatever it was, that moment, that experience became a pivotal experience in your life of faith, which, is awesome. It really is. But here's the thing. All of that is circumstantial faith. It's believing in God or even redefining God based on Him showing up or not showing up in the circumstances of life. And don't get me wrong, you hear this. God can and does show up just like that in some of those examples and more. He just shows up like that. But if we depend, if that's what our faith foundation is built on, all those good circumstances and God showing up and yay God. Well, when life doesn't go the way we think it should, when God doesn't show up in our circumstances, that's when things will begin to wobble and not make sense. And we'll find ourselves pulling things apart. Circumstantial faith is fragile because life is random. And at times it just simply does not make any sense from our perspective. And in light of our beliefs about what God is like, it just makes it all the more confusing. Look at the last 2 years. There are so many people that I've spoken with that are completely disillusioned with God. Even was pushing in on that myself. It's like, what is going on? Well, you left the planet or something? With all the pain and the suffering that's been going on? All the loss of life due to COVID? The loss of jobs and businesses? Weddings, funerals, birthdays, graduations being canceled? Relationships and friendships strained or lost over perspectives and opinions regarding vaccine, no vaccine, mask, no mask, health orders, follow them, don't follow them. Back and forth it goes, and it's just like, God, where are you in all of this? Now, sometimes you see God in the circumstances of life, and sometimes you don't. But we always try and piece it together. We're always trying to figure it out. And sometimes we'll think, well, maybe that happened because this happened. Or maybe that was a sign. Circumstantial faith is fragile. And I'm just going to throw this out there for you to consider. But I believe that circumstantial faith is fragile because it's easily eroded and easily undermined by two things. Okay? The pleasures of life and the pressures of life. The pleasures of life erode circumstantial faith because eventually, if we're really honest, sometimes following Jesus is really inconvenient. Right? It might be something like this. I believe in God. I want to do my best to follow him. I believe he loves me and he has a plan for my life and he's shown me a better way to live life. But then what happens? We meet the guy. We meet the girl. We fall in love. And then all of a sudden hormones and biology kick in and all of a sudden you're starting to talk about sex before marriage. What do we do? And all of a sudden doing life God's way, it's kind of inconvenient. Or maybe you were raised in a family that taught you, and rightly so, that cheating is wrong. You just don't cheat to make your way through life. And you grew up believing that and holding on to that. But then, you moved out of the house and you got a job at this really great company. But then you notice that it's a company where stretching the truth is kind of like a business practice. And as you get deeper into this company, as you hang around longer and you kind of move up the ladder, you realize that cheating and fudging and not disclosing certain information, well, that's just how business gets done. And now you're in a dilemma because you believe that was wrong. But you look around the office and it's like, doesn't seem to be bugging anyone else. And so you're left with three choices. I can either work here and feel guilty all the time. I can quit my job and go find a job in another company. Or I can decide that what I've always believed to be true isn't really true. You tell yourself that maybe in an environment like this, being a little dishonest, cheating, fudging things a little bit, isn't all that bad. Besides, everyone else is doing it. Over time, because of a lifestyle decision, we change what we believe, not because of great research and thinking and working things through or God revealing to us, this is a better way to live your life. No, we begin to change what we believe because of a lifestyle decision. I want to stay in this company. I like this company. I want to stay in that relationship. I like him, her. I don't want to feel guilty about what I'm doing. And so what do? We decide that what I'm doing isn't all that bad. We just remove that from our faith structure. Begin to deconstruct. But here's the thing. When you go down that road far enough, eventually you're going to look around and you're going to realize you have completely dismantled your faith to the point where you don't have one that's worth following anymore. You quit believing in what the Bible teaches and how it teaches a better way to do life, to connect with one another and relate to one another and connect and relate to God. And it's because your desires and your beliefs and your faith were just inconvenient. Circumstantial faith is also fragile because of the pressures of life. The pressures of life are going to cause us to question it every time. If you live long enough, things are going to happen that don't fit within your picture, your view of God. For example, maybe you were raised to believe that God would never abandon you, but your current circumstances say otherwise. You stood up for a truth, and it cost you. It cost you maybe your job, a relationship, a friendship. Maybe you were taught or heard that God would always protect you. But your current circumstances indicate that doesn't seem to be true because maybe you were abused from someone you trusted. Or you were betrayed by a loved one. And it seemed like God was nowhere to be found. So you begin to deconstruct your picture of God. Maybe you were raised to believe that, and this is how I was raised for the most part, that if you did ABC, God would do DEF. And so you diligently do ABC, but God doesn't do DEF. And it's like, what the heck is with that? And so the things that you thought were true about God and faith and all that doesn't work. It just doesn't fit together anymore, and so you begin to deconstruct. And this is super common. The pain of life often leads us to discouragement and disbelief. I've talked to so many people over the years, and the story goes something like this. I don't know what to believe anymore about God. This was happening in my life. I asked him to help me, to be with me, to walk with me, to see me through it, and he didn't, and I just don't even know what to believe anymore. I'm pretty much done. And so we deconstruct. Maybe you prayed to God, to answer a prayer. You're looking for work. And so you pray. It's like, God, you know how much I need a job. The bills are coming. They're not stopping. But I've got no income coming in. And so you pray and you pray and you pray. And on top of that, you do everything that you can do. You've written the resume, you've gone out, you've knocked on doors, handed them out, and still no job. You start to feel like a failure because you can't provide for your family. And you begin to question everything because you can't see God in your circumstance. But here's the thing, and I'll throw this out to you to kind of roll around. It's not circumstances we're dealing with, is it? What we're dealing with is our interpretation of the circumstance. And more often than not, especially when life is coming at us, we're not very good at interpreting circumstances. I mean, how many of you here have had something like this happen? At the time, something's going on, and at the time you're thinking, man, this sucks. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. But then, years later, you look back, and you find yourself saying, man, I didn't think it at the time. I would have never said it at the time. But you know what? That is the best thing that could have ever happened to me. You see, we operate in these tiny, constrictive time frames when it comes to God. At least I do, okay? I won't assume anything about you, but here's my story. If I have a problem on Monday, I'll pray about it on Monday night, Tuesday. But by the time Wednesday rolls around, if nothing's happening, I assume that something's wrong somewhere. And so I'll say, okay, God, I don't know what's going on here, but this needs to be dealt with. And so I'm going to be super gracious here. I'm going to give you till Sunday. So you got like Thursday, you got Friday, Saturday. I'll even give you most of Sunday. But you better show up. And what happens? 2 weeks go by, and still nothing. Not the result I want anyway. And so what do? I begin to question God. This expectation of God delivering results on our time frame is so important, because when we evaluate God's faithfulness based on a time frame that suits us, in effect what we're doing is pushing buttons on a vending machine. We're pushing those buttons and saying, okay, this is what I want. And God's going to deliver it. When it comes to time, we're looking at a day. God's looking at a decade. He's looking at a lifetime. Time for a little reconstruction here. There's a letter in the Bible that was written to a bunch of first century Jews who had decided to follow Jesus, okay? But they were struggling in their faith in Jesus, because what they had been taught was that after Jesus rose from the dead that first Easter, and was seen by hundreds of people, he went to his closest followers and he says, okay, guys, I'm going up to heaven, but I'll be back. And that's what they heard. But what they heard was he was coming right back. Kind of like don't buy green bananas back. Okay? And so they were waiting. And this was a great expectation. It gave them great hope. They wanted Jesus to come back, and the sooner the better, because life for them was hard. They lost their jobs, their ability to work, to eat. They were disowned by family and friends, all because they chose to follow Jesus. They were in the crosshairs of the religious leaders at the time and the Roman government, both of whom did not like Jesus followers very much. And so when these people heard that Jesus would be back to get them, they couldn't wait. It was like, hurry up. But then days passed. And days turned into weeks, and weeks bled into months. Months turned into years. There they were, waiting, wondering where Jesus was, because they certainly couldn't see him in their circumstances. And so what happened? They began to doubt and deconstruct their faith. Many of them to the point where they were just ready to turn their back on Jesus and walk away from it. That's why this letter, called Hebrews, named after the people it was written to, was written. It was written to encourage them. To not to say it's wrong to doubt, but to hang in there. And the same is true for us today. That's why that letter is, and that's a beautiful thing about the Bible. We can see our stories in the stories of the people in the Bible. And maybe what these people were going through is described, you can see yourself in that story. I am waiting for Jesus to show up, and he hasn't shown up, and I'm beginning to wonder. And if that's you, I hope you'll be encouraged as I read some words found in that letter. In chapter 11, the Bible's broken up into verses and chapters just for reference, and this happens in chapter 11. And this chapter is often referred to in church circles as the Hall of Faith. Kind of like the Hall of Fame, but it's a Hall of Faith because it recounts stories of people who had faith in God even though they couldn't see him in their circumstances. And what's really cool is before the writer of this letter gets into the stories of those people, he reminds them and us today what faith is. And here's how he defines faith. It's a beautiful definition. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Another way to put it is faith is being sure, absolutely convinced, utterly confident of something that I hope, dream, desire, long, and hope for, and that I am certain, completely, totally, and thoroughly sure that something that hasn't happened yet is going to happen. That's what faith is. And the rest of the chapter is full of stories of people who were full of that kind of faith. For example, we read this, and if by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, and when you read that holy fear, that doesn't mean like, oh, it's like reverent awe and respect for who God is, built an ark to save his family. Now, it's really interesting. I don't know if you've read through the Bible. If you haven't, there's a really good app. I know a lot of you here are going through it. I'm going through it myself. It's by Nicky Gumbel, the creator of Alpha. It's the Bible in a year. You can jump in at any time. It's an app. It takes you about 15 minutes a day. He ties the Old Testament, New Testament. It's really cool the way he does it. But if you open up, the first words you read in the Bible is, in the beginning, God created. And he goes through we go through the creation story. And at the end, it says, God said it was good. Very good. And then 5 chapters later, humanity's in a mess. Like, it's just gone completely off the rails. And so God thinks, you know what? I'm going to start again. Not completely start again, but I'm going to start again. And I'm going to flood the earth. And so before he does it, he goes to this guy named Noah. And he says, Noah, I need you to build me a boat. Not a small boat, like a big boat. Okay? And so what does Noah do? He builds a boat. In essence, he says to God, okay, I'll do it. I have no idea why you would want me to build a boat, because I don't know if you've noticed or not, God, but I live in a desert. I don't live in Nanaimo. It hasn't rained here in ever. I don't even think I know what rain looks like. But if you say it's going to rain, even though I can't see it happening, if you say so, I'll build a boat because I believe and I trust you. That's faith. The next person this writer mentions is a guy who, if you were to go to Jerusalem and ask somebody and say, who is it that kind of kicked off this whole Jewish race thing? They would say, Abraham. Abraham's our father. And the interesting thing is that when we get introduced to Abraham in the Bible, he's like 75 years old. Now, there was a time when I thought 75 was old. It's not old, okay? That's why they say 75 years young, okay? Just saying. So anyway, he's 75. He's married to a woman about the same age. Her name's Sarah. They don't have any kids. She wasn't able to conceive and have children. And so the last thing on their mind is building a nursery, okay? It's not even on the radar. But then God comes along and he says to Abraham, pack up your tent and go. To which Abraham says, well, where? To which God says, I'll show you. Now imagine that. It's a little vague, right? Just pack up your stuff and go. It's like, to where? Well, don't worry about it. I'll show you. Okay, but can you at least tell me what's going to happen when I get there? And God says, yeah, I'm going to start a nation. And I'm going to create it through you and your wife. I know that you don't have any kids right now, but you're going to have so many kids and so many grandkids and so many great-great-grandkids. Your family's going to be so big, it's going to be like trying to count the stars in the sky or the grains of sand on the seashore. That's how many you're going to have. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. And by faith, Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him, God, faithful. In other words, she was sure, hopeful, absolutely confident that something that hadn't happened yet was going to happen. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, which is like, ouch, that hurts, right? You're almost dead, Abraham, but I'm going to work through you anyways. Came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. The list of people goes on and on. And every story starts with the same two words. By faith. By faith, these people, even though they couldn't see everything, they were sure, positive, confident of what they hoped for, and convinced that what hadn't happened yet would happen because God said it would. Despite the circumstances they found themselves in, and if you read through that chapter, they found themselves in some pretty dire circumstances. They were destitute, they were ridiculed, they were mistreated, they were homeless, they were hungry. And despite all of that, they refused to give up on God because their faith wasn't based in or on their circumstances. All these people died having faith in God, it says. They did not receive what God had promised to them, but they could see far ahead to all the things God had promised. And they were glad for them. In the late 1800s, a lawyer from Chicago named Horatio Gates Spafford became a follower of Jesus. In 1870, he and his wife suffered a devastating loss when their son, who was named after him, died of scarlet fever. Devastated the family. 1 year later, they would lose most of their fortune to the fire that was in Chicago in 1871. The Great Fire just burned the whole city down. They're still lamenting the loss of their son, and then they get dealt that. Understandably, Horatio's wife was really struggling with all the loss. And so at the advice of their family doctor, Horatio booked a trip to Europe so the family could just get away. Due to some last-minute business dealings that came up that he had to take care of, he sent his wife and his 4 daughters ahead and said, I'll be like 2 days behind you. I'll see you on the other side in Wales. Well, while they were crossing, the ship that his wife and daughters were on was rammed by another ship by accident, and it resulted in the ship sinking and the loss of 226 lives, and among them the four of his daughters. All 4 of his daughters died. His wife was found clinging to a piece of wood from the wreckage and rescued and taken to Wales. And as Horatio Spafford traveled to ship to be with her, he penned one of the most famous Christian hymns of all time, titled, "It Is Well With My Soul." When peace, like a river, attendeth my way, when the sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot or circumstances, you have taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is hard to imagine this guy saying and writing and singing, it is well with my soul, after he had been through what he had been through. The only thing that explains it was he was sure of what he hoped for and certain of what he couldn't see. And I can't help but wonder and question my own faith and wonder, would it take me through an experience like that where I would come out the other side a positive and hopeful person? And you know what? I don't think I can answer that. Because I don't think it's something you can answer until you've actually been through it. But what I can say is this: I am on a journey to build and construct a faith that is secured not in the circumstances of life, not on the pleasures or the pressures of life, but built on the life and death of an actual person, the person Jesus Christ. Look, deconstruction, there is nothing wrong with deconstruction, but as we talked about last week, know why you're deconstructing. Know why you're deconstructing. Because you know what? We don't have a handle on God. God is so outside our realm, we can make certain assumptions about it, but we don't know how he works exactly. And so by keeping our hearts and minds open to the fact that we are human, and we will get things wrong, we will not only be much more open to recognizing the flaws in our beliefs and kind of questioning them and maybe rebuilding them, we will also be willing and able to deconstruct them in order to root out the flaws and reconstruct them around something that's true and beautiful and loving and good, and thereby change how we live and interact with this world. That is the faith that God desires for every single one of us, and it is a faith worth going after. And I am honored to be on this journey with you. I invite you to pray. God, when it comes to you and life and how they all intersect, it can be so confusing. Especially when we have so many value systems thrown at us, and we're trying to figure out which one is right or true, but oftentimes it comes down to which one serves me best. And the truth is, you are the one that serves us best. But that can be hard. But you are so gentle, you are so patient, that you are willing to take our hand and walk with us. And so I pray for all of us, when we come to those moments in our life where we're doubting and questioning what we truly believe about you, that you would hold us close. You would put people in our pathway that would encourage us and inspire us to hang in there and look at the promises that you have made to us, even though we can't see them. And we pray all of this in your powerful name. Amen.